A man wrapped in a rough garment of camel's hair stands waist-deep in brown. Fast-moving water. Same sequence. Most people read the Bible and assume the Jordan River is just geography. The silence lasts for 4 centuries. No prophets. No fire. No parted waters. Rome paves roads over the ancient dust. Herod builds a massive, gleaming temple of white stone and gold. The religious elites construct a system of ceremonial washing pools right at the steps of the sanctuary. They are carved from smooth bedrock. They are filled with clean, collected rainwater. They are polite. They are controlled. They are the center of power. And then, a wild man emerges in the wasteland. He wears rough camel's hair that scratches against the skin. He eats wild honey and the crunch of locusts. He preaches with a voice that cuts through the blistering heat of the Rift Valley. But the most shocking thing about John the Baptist is not his wardrobe. It is his location. He does not march into Jerusalem. He does not stand at the pristine, white stone pools of the Temple Mount. He turns his back on the religious establishment, walks miles down into the suffocating heat of the wilderness, and stands waist-deep in the muddy, rushing water of the descender. And he tells the people to come to him. They walk away from the city. They hike down into the furnace. They strip off their sandals and stand in the exact same silt and mud where Joshua's priests once carried the ark. A boundary line on an ancient map separating the wilderness from the promised land. A convenient, deep enough pool for John the Baptist to immerse repenting sinners. John is doing something highly subversive. He is reenacting the ancient entry by forcing the Jewish people out into the wilderness and pulling them through the Jordan River. John is sending a devastating theological message. Geographically, they are living in the promised land, but spiritually, they are back in exile. They are slaves again. They are wandering. The baptism of John is not a ceremonial washing. It is a second Exodus. He is analyzing their condition and telling the nation that their pedigree will not save them. Their temple sacrifices will not save them. To enter the true kingdom, they have to go back to the beginning. They have to descend. They have to drown the old identity in the river of death and come up on the other side as a completely new creation. Thousands make the descent. Tax collectors step into the mud. Soldiers wade into the current. Pharisees stand on the steep banks, watching the water rush by. The descender is doing its ancient work. It is stripping away pride. It is burying the dead. It is preparing the ground for a new conquest. But John knows he is only the warm-up act. He tells the dripping crowds that someone else is coming, someone who will baptize not just with muddy water, but with the Spirit. He looks up at the ridge, but if you look closer at the shape of the land itself, at the men who stand on its banks, he waits for a king to arrive in glory. And then, a quiet carpenter from Nazareth walks down into the dirt. Jesus walks down the sun-baked embankment. He does not arrive with a chariot and silver like the Aramean general. He does not carry a heavy wooden box covered in gold like the ancient priests. He simply walks into the muddy, brown current and asks the wild man to lower him beneath the surface. John balks. He knows who this is. He feels the terrible inversion of the Creator asking a creature to baptize him. But Jesus insists. He steps deeper into the silt. And to understand why this moment is the hinge of biblical history, you have to look at the name of the man standing in the water. When you read the story in English, you call him Jesus. That name comes from the Greek Isus, but Isus is just the 1st century Greek transliteration of the Hebrew name Yeshua, and Yeshua is a shortened form of Yehoshua, Joshua. For a 1st century Jewish reader, that linguistic link changes everything. The echo is deafening. The second Joshua has just walked down into the exact same rushing current, where the first Joshua stood 14 centuries earlier. But their methods of crossing are entirely different. At the specific miracles that happen in its current, you start to see something the geographical reading completely misses. The first Joshua forced the water of death to stand up like a wall. Refusing to let it touch the people of God, he held back the descender so the nation could cross on safe. Dry dirt. The second, Joshua does not stop the water. He lets it swallow him. He goes down into the river of death on behalf of a human race that is drowning in it. The architect of the universe submits to the mud, to the heavy current, to the suffocating depths of the lowest place on earth. He goes under. The brown water closes over his head. And then, he breaks the surface. The Gospel of Mark uses a violent Greek verb to describe what happens next, schizo. The fabric of the sky does not gently part. It tears open. The Spirit descends like a dove, hovering over the water just as it did at the dawn of Genesis. A voice thunders over the roar of the river, declaring love and pleasure before the Son has performed a single miracle or preached a single sermon. The baptism is not an apology for sin. It is the inauguration of a new creation. The water of the descender could not hold him. The theological burial in the Jordan is a deliberate preview of the physical burial in a stone tomb 3 years later. The Jordan is not a map line. It is a theological threshold. Why this river? Jesus could have chosen the Sea of Galilee. The second, Joshua is preparing to lead his people into a radically different promised land. And he starts by conquering the waters of death from the inside out. The physical pattern is complete. But this ancient river still runs directly through the center of the human heart today. We are a species terrified of the water. We like the shore. We prefer the high ground. We build our lives in the dry dust because it is predictable. We read the ancient stories and wonder how 1 million people could wander in circles for 40 years. We wonder how they could stand on the edge of an inheritance and refuse to walk in. But the ancient pattern is our pattern. We run the exact same script. We stand on the eastern bank. We look across the ravine. We want the new life. We want the restoration. We want the quiet peace of the kingdom. But then we look down at the river. We hear the violent roar of the Yarden. We smell the heavy, suffocating mud. We see the terrifying speed of the descender. We realize what crossing actually requires. It requires the armor. It requires the chariot. It requires the heavy leather mantle we use to protect our reputation. You cannot carry your pride into the current, with its clear, cool waters and gentle, sloping shores. He could have chosen the ceremonial washing pools, cut into smooth white stone, right at the temple steps. You cannot swim across the Rift Valley while gripping your status in both hands. So we back away. We walk back into the scorching heat of the desert. We settle for a phantom wilderness. We live in a modern culture entirely obsessed with self-improvement. We want to add a little bit of the kingdom to our existing empire. We want the resurrection without the burial. We want a gentle splash of clean, polite water from a polished white basin. But the river of death does not negotiate. The descender does not compromise with human ego. It does not respect military rank. It does not care about your religious pedigree or your carefully curated image. It only knows one direction: down. The refusal to step into the water is not a lack of intellectual belief. It is a calculated act of self-preservation. We stay in the wilderness because we are afraid to drown. We are afraid to let the old identity slip beneath the blinding brown surface. We are afraid of what we will lose if we finally let go of the shore. The tax collectors on the bank knew it. The Roman soldiers knew it. The Aramean general knew it. In Jerusalem, it would have been cleaner. It would have been far more religious. Instead, he walks dozens of miles away from the center of religious power. We want the grace, but we refuse the grave. But the people who finally surrender, the ones who take off their sandals, step down into the silt, and let the current swallow them, completely discover an impossible secret hiding in the depths. A nation of slaves faced a flooded ravine and walked out as heirs to a promise. A prophet struck the water with heavy leather, and a student crossed over to carry the fire. A foreign commander dipped 7 times in the mud, and his rotting skin was washed away. A wild man called his people back to the wilderness, and thousands drowned their old lives in the current. The second Joshua surrendered to the suffocating depths, and the fabric of the sky tore open. The Creator let the descender swallow him completely, and a new creation was inaugurated in the silt. And millions of ordinary people stepped off the safety of the shore and discovered the grave they feared was actually a womb. Same water, Same descender, same God. But maybe the part that stays with me most is the armor on the bank, down into a barren, scorched wasteland. He chooses to stand in a muddy, winding stream that empties directly into a sea where nothing can survive. The gleaming bronze left in the dust, the polished leather straps abandoned in the blistering heat. Naaman expected a spectacle, a theatrical wave of the hand that would leave his dignity intact. But God demanded a descent. Naaman had to take off the very thing that made him powerful before he could actually be healed. The descender did not want his silver, it wanted his pride. If you are in a season where you are standing on the edge of a new beginning, but the water in front of you looks terrifying, you are in the exact geographical center of biblical history. Maybe you have been gripping your armor, trying to negotiate with the current. You want the healing, but you refuse to leave your status on the shore. You want the new life, but you are terrified to lose control. The water is not there to destroy you. It is there to drown the thing that is quietly killing you. The kingdom of heaven does not require you to be strong enough to swim. It requires you to be brave enough to go under. And may the God who meets us in the muddy, lowest places of the earth, to give you the courage to finally step off the shore and bring you up on the other side, carrying a life you could not have engineered yourself. He does this because he knows what the water requires. He is not just offering a ritual. He is diagnosing a human condition. To feel the weight of what happens to Jesus in the mud, you have to understand the water he is standing in. The sun beats down on the Judean wilderness, turning the dust on the steep riverbanks into fine white powder. You have to trace this current back through the centuries to the moment it first stopped flowing. But the detail that changes how you read, every one of these stories is not found in the water itself. It is hiding in the Hebrew name of the river. If you look at a topographical map of ancient Israel, the eastern border is a jagged, plunging scar. The river begins in the north, high up in the cool, white snowmelt of Mount Hermon. But it does not stay there. It cuts violently south through steep limestone ravines, dropping in elevation faster than almost any other major river in the region. You do not simply stroll to the banks of the Jordan. You hike down into a furnace. It twists and turns, gathering brown mud and silt, plunging deeper and deeper into the Great Rift Valley, until the air grows suffocating and the temperature burns on your skin. Finally, it empties into a basin, nearly 400 feet below sea level, the Dead Sea, a body of water so choked with salt and thick sulfur that no fish can breathe in it, no roots can drink from it, and no outlet allows it to escape. The river only knows one direction: down. The air is heavy, thick with the blistering heat of the lowest place on earth. A crowd of desperate people, tax collectors, soldiers, religious elites lines the muddy shore. And the ancient Hebrews embedded this terrifying physical reality right into the name. When you read the name Jordan in your English Bible, you are reading the Hebrew word Yarden. It is formed directly from the Hebrew root verb yarad, and yarad means to descend, to sink, or to go down. It appears hundreds of times in the Old Testament, and its range of meaning is profound. It is the exact verb the author of Jonah uses to describe a man running away from the presence of God. Jonah Yarad goes down to the port city of Joppa. He goes down into the ship. He goes down into the belly of the sea. Yarad is the biblical vocabulary for descending. It is the language of lowering yourself, of moving away from the safety of the high places, of entering into the depths where you have no control. That route changes everything. The Jordan is not just a geographic boundary line on a map. It is the descender. It is a river that carries everything caught in its current directly into a graveyard of salt. When a biblical author tells you that a character is going to the Jordan, they are not just giving you driving directions. They are telling you that this person is descending. They are stepping off the high ground, leaving behind their security, and walking down. They are watching him. They are waiting their turn to strip off their sandals, step down the slippery bank, and go beneath the surface, into the lowest, most vulnerable place on earth. To cross it, you have to survive the descent. But the detail that makes this specific water The central artery of biblical history is what happens when God forces an entire generation of former slaves to stare at its current. Springtime in the Rift Valley. The white snows of Mount Hermon melt. The northern tributaries gorge themselves. The banks of the Descender overflow. A violent, Lawson Raypen, brown torrent rips south toward the Dead Sea, dragging trees and debris in its wake. You can hear the roar of the floodwaters from miles away. You can smell the crushed reeds and the wet, suffocating earth. Joshua stands on the eastern shore. He looks at the chaotic water. For 40 years, this people ate dust. For 40 years, they buried their parents in the scorching sand. Now, the hills of the Promised Land are finally visible on the other side. But to get there, they have to face the Yarden. Joshua does not build a bridge. He does not search for a shallow ford. He does not wait for the summer drought. He orders the priests to walk directly into the flood. They step forward. They carry the heavy wooden box of the covenant. The gold poles press into their shoulders. The river rushes violently at their legs. Their bare toes touch the edge of the rushing mud, and the water stops. And the man tells them that if they want the kingdom of heaven, they have to drown their old lives in this specific current. It does not slowly recede. It does not gently fade. It stands up in a towering, solid wall miles upstream at a town called Adam. The riverbed instantly bakes into dry dirt. 1 million slaves step down into the basin. 1 million heirs walk up the western bank. A generation of wanderers descends. A nation of conquerors rises. They carry their children. They drive their flocks. They look up at the terrifying wall of water held back by an invisible hand. The river is not a geographical hurdle. It is a burial. The old identity must be left in the water. The new identity is born on the other side. You cannot inherit the promise until you survive the descent. Joshua commands them to gather 12 heavy stones from the exact spot where the priests are standing. They carry them up to the new land. Then, they take 12 different stones from the shore and bury them in the deepest part of the channel. It is a physical exchange, an ancient transaction of death and resurrection, permanently marking the floor of the Descender. The last priest steps out of the ravine. The invisible hand lets go. The water crashes back down with terrifying force. The current of death resumes its violent march to the Sea of Salt. The path is closed, but the memory of the divided water remains in the soil, in the air. It is the most famous baptism in history. But it is not the first time a nation's destiny has hinged on stepping into this exact river, in the very DNA of Israel. And centuries later, 2 prophets will walk back to this exact same rushing current. The biblical authors do not waste geography. When a location repeats in the Hebrew texts, it is acting as a literary hyperlink. It is designed to force your mind back to the original event, layering the meaning of the past onto the action of the present. By the time we reach the book of 2 Kings, the Jordan is no longer just a river that needs crossing. It has become a boundary of theological authorization. Centuries after Joshua, the nation of Israel is fractured, drowning in idolatry, and the prophetic office is preparing to pass from a master to his student. Elijah and Elisha leave the populated cities behind. They walk down into the suffocating heat of the Rift Valley. Standing at the edge of the rushing Descender, Elijah takes his heavy, hair-covered cloak, his mantle rolls it up, and violently strikes the surface of the water. You can hear the sharp, echoing crack of the leather hitting the current. The river divides. The 2 men cross on dry ground, but Elijah does not return. He is taken up in a whirlwind of fire, leaving his student behind in the dust. A priest carries a heavy wooden box into a raging spring flood, and the water stands up like a wall of glass. Elisha picks up the fallen piece of rough clothing and walks back to the edge of the river. If watching these ancient patterns interlock is stirring up questions you've never considered, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe. Because every week, we go deeper into the text than you knew was possible. So, Elisha stands alone on the eastern bank. He holds the heavy fabric in his hands. The muddy water is rushing violently in front of him. blocking his path back to his people, back to his calling. He rolls up the cloak, strikes the water, and cries out into the barren wilderness, "Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" The water splits a second time. The student crosses back over. The crossing is not a magic trick. It is an ordination. The authors are showing you the architecture of succession, just as the authority of Moses transferred to Joshua at the edge of the Jordan. The authority of Elijah transfers to Elisha at the exact same location. The descender is the proving ground. It is the crucible where the old era ends, and the new era is officially recognized by the earth itself. A prophet rolls up his cloak, strikes the surface, and walks across on dry dust. A foreign military commander with rotting, leprous skin dips himself 7 times. You cannot lead God's people from the safety of the high ground. You must prove you can walk through the lowest place and come out carrying the Spirit on the other side. But the river of death does not only authorize Hebrew prophets, it also dismantles the pride of a foreign commander. A commander of the Aramean army steps down from his chariot. His horses stamp in the dust outside the prophet's house in Samaria. His armor gleams in the blinding sun. But beneath the polished bronze, beneath the heavy linen tunic of a decorated warrior, his skin is rotting away. The flesh is white, flaking, numb. He has brought silver. He has brought gold. He has brought a royal letter from a king. He expects a spectacle. He expects the prophet to march out, wave his hand over the sores, and call on the name of his God with a booming, theatrical voice. But Elisha does not even walk out the door. A messenger simply hands the commander a devastating instruction: go wash in the Jordan 7 times. Naaman is furious. He is a man of the high places. He is a man of clear, pristine rivers back in Damascus, the Abana and the Pharpar. Rivers of cold mountain snowmelt. He refuses to strip off his dignity and wade into the muddy, brown, winding trench of Israel. He refuses to go down into the descender, but his servants beg him. And so, the general descends. He walks away from his chariot. He unbuckles the heavy leather straps and comes up clean. A wild man in the wilderness lowers the Son of God beneath the surface, and the sky itself tears open. He takes off the armor, exposing the rotting, shameful secret he has been hiding beneath his uniform. He steps into the warm, silt-heavy current. The mud pulls at his bare toes. The water closes over his head. Once, twice, 3 times. You can see the brown dirt clinging to his pale skin as he breaches the surface, gasping for the heavy valley air. 4 times, 5 times. He must leave his rank on the shore. He must leave his wealth on the bank. He must leave his pride in the dust. The river of death is not a magic potion. It is a humiliation. 6 times. He goes under the water for the 7th time, letting the descender swallow him completely. When he breaks the surface, the rotting flesh is gone. The scarred, decaying skin of a warrior is replaced by the soft, restored skin of a young child. He went down a proud Aramean conqueror. He comes up a clean, humbled worshiper of the God of Israel. For centuries, the Jordan River waits. It divides for leaders. It cleanses lepers. It stands as the permanent dividing line between the wilderness of death and the kingdom of promise. And then, silence. For 400 years, the water just flows. The prophets disappear. The voice of God goes quiet. The nation waits under the crushing, suffocating boot of the Roman Empire, until a strange voice cries out in the dust,